Boys Don't Cry, written by YouBlitheringIdiot, read to you by So Breezy. Chapter 3, Too Unkind. I would say I'm sorry if I thought that it would change your mind, but I know that this time I've said too much, been too unkind. Boys Don't Cry, The Cure. She didn't know Sirius Black. He wasn't exactly approachable. Outwardly confident, superficially charming, annoying prankster, clever, witty yet aloof, Lily knew he kept most people at arm's length. She had been wondering how to drag him to the infirmary when she spotted Black and Potter ahead of her, walking down the stairs. Without warning, Black seemed to crumple, and his limp body rolled down the rest of the stairs, landing with a light thud on the third-floor corridor. "Pats!" Potter was racing down after him in seconds. He turned his friend over with a terrified look on his face. "Are you all right? Merlin, fuck!" Lily flew down after them. "I'm fine, you dork," Sirius groaned. He wasn't fine. He was decidedly not fine. She watched Potter cast a dozen healing spells, his eyes narrowed with concentration. How was he so expert at this? It was probably something to do with Remus, she guessed. She was pretty sure she knew what was wrong with her favorite marauder. "Stop fussing, Prongs. I haven't broken anything," Black said, casting a bemused, fond look at the boy with the messy hair. "No offense, but you're a clueless arse when it comes to looking after yourself, Padfoot," Potter answered calmly, ignoring his protests. "How are we even still friends when all you do is insult me?" Black muttered. "Shut up. We're brothers. You don't need to like me." "You're stuck with me regardless," Potter replied. Potter's tone of voice was so different once again. Only good-natured banter hiding real concern. She could see the warmth, kindness reflected in his eyes. She had never noticed how pretty his hazel eyes were, with gold flecks, the darker limbal ring of his iris a gray color. "Evans, you're staring." Black's eyes had a mischievous glint. She rolled her eyes back at him, hoping she wasn't blushing. She extended her arm. "Here," she said. This time it was Black's turn to roll his eyes. Potter grabbed his other hand, and together they pulled him up, swaying slightly. His face was ashen. "You are coming with me. No arguments," she said, linking arms with him and starting to walk down the corridor. "Where are you taking me? Is this a hot date? Because no offense, Evans," Lily snorted. "In your dreams, Black," she said. His face stiffened a bit, and it suddenly hit her that he didn't like being called Black. "In your dreams, Sirius," she amended, smiling at him. "We're making an unexpected visit to one of your favorite people, Poppy Pomfrey," she added, walking onwards with a steady pace. "Oh, Merlin, not you too," Sirius groaned. "I'm perfectly fine, I told you." "Sirius, have you ever heard of the term toxic masculinity?" "No, but I have a feeling you are going to enlighten me," Sirius sighed. Lily turned to look at James Potter, who was still standing where they had left him, hands in his pockets. "I certainly am," she said, winking at James. "I've got this." Relief flooded his face, and the smile he sent back to her was so genuine. As he raised his thumb at her, a muggle gesture, she grinned back. "Among other things, toxic masculinity makes guys think they have to be strong all the time. That it's okay to be aggressive, that it's bad to show your emotions or accept help because that's somehow weak. Instead of that being simply stupid," she said, looking straight ahead as they kept walking. She had no idea how closely she was describing Orion Henry Black's views. Sirius's voice was quiet. "Sound a bit like you, maybe?" Lily's tone wasn't judgmental, and she still wasn't looking at him, which made it easier. "Maybe," he answered, cautiously after a beat. "I have a bet with Severus," she said, coming to a halt in front of the infirmary and regarding the dark-haired boy casually. He claims he didn't curse you. I bet he did. We need someone to give us an answer, and I need to win because I'll have run out of pocket money soon, and I really want the dosh. She could see him wavering. He was still swaying unsteadily, even holding on to her arm. Fine, but only as a favor, Evans, he grumbled. She beamed. Behind the cool facade, Sirius Black was different. Less confident, less annoying, sweeter. She squeezed his arm lightly. Now that she looked him in the eyes, she could see how hard he was fighting to maintain his tough exterior, his clear gray eyes full of unexpressed emotions. Fear, helplessness, anger. I'm coming with you, she told him. It was not easy arguing with Lily Evans. She was the best and sassiest debater in the class. Sirius opened his mouth to protest, took one look at her vivid, memorable eyes, daring him to contradict her, and gave up. Thanks, Evans. I owe you, he said gruffly. I'll buy you a butterbeer with the dosh, she said, grinning at him. You know, Sirius, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Sirius snorted like he didn't give a shit. It's a quote, Casablanca, she said. I keep forgetting you're all so clueless here. You've already lost me, Evans, he said. If you're going to be cool, and I mean really cool, there's a hell of a lot of muggle stuff you still need to learn, she said, patting his arm condescendingly and knocking on the door before he could chicken out. For starters, we're talking music, clothes, films. Sirius's tired eyes livened up. The wizarding world is so uncool, he said, making a disgusted face. I know, she replied. Are you offering some tutorials on cool muggle shit? In return for the odd transfiguration tutorial? Sure, she shrugged. I'm all in, he said, grinning back. Did you like question 10, Mooney? Asked Sirius as they emerged into the entrance hall. Loved it, said Remus briskly. Give 5 signs that identify the werewolf. Excellent question. Do you think you managed to get all the signs? Said James in tones of mock concern. Think I did, said Remus seriously, as they separated from the crowd thronging around the front doors, eager to get out into the sunlit grounds. 1, he's sitting on my chair. 2, he's wearing my clothes. 3, his name's Remus Lupin. James grinned back. Remus's face had looked haunted when the topic of werewolves was discussed in their defense against the dark arts lesson that year. He remembered how triumphant Snape's face had looked that day, how he had stared at Remus for the entire class, until James had fired a jelly brain jinx at him, earning himself a detention. He was glad Remus seemed happier today. James stuffed the snitch back in his pocket. He had only just nicked it. He had been hoping that Lily would look his way and spot his remarkably excellent reflexes and think him very cool, the way most girls seem to. But sadly, she seemed unaware or uninterested in his existence. He sighed dramatically. You slept. You slept really well last night, Remus said, shielding his eyes and giving his friend a glowing smile. Yeah, I did, Sirius grinned back at him, all lazy, cocky confidence once more. James gritted his teeth. He wanted nothing more than to scream to the world that Poppy Pomfrey had confirmed that something had rendered Sirius dangerously anemic, and that the inexplicable insomnia sounded like it might possibly be an old-fashioned, extremely dangerous curse, which had been known to precipitate insanity in predisposed individuals. Although there was no trace of dark magic on him when she had examined him. Both she and Lily thought no student would dare cast it. Lily had been very relieved, Sirius had told him. She was too nice, he thought grimly. Other people who excelled in the dark arts, were not. Poppy had forced Sirius to remain under her treatment for 3 days, reluctantly letting him out the previous evening just in time for the start of the Owls that morning. He knew Severus fucking Snape was the culprit, even though he couldn't prove it. Mooney didn't sleep well at all, he said, ruffling Sirius's hair and smirking at Sirius's offended face. Why not? Worrying about today's exams, you swat? Sirius laughed. Worrying about you, more like. He got up a few times to check if you were asleep or dead, James said. No way was he going to own up to doing the exact same thing himself. Sirius would use it against him. Huh? Said Peter, throwing his gray school bag, the one with the too long shoulder strap which he was always nearly tripping over, onto the grass with a loud sigh of relief. Peter had slept through the night like a baby. Aw, Moony, you're so sweet, Sirius said, reclining back onto the warm grass, with effortless elegance, a smug expression, looking inordinately pleased. Yeah, that's me. A sweet, furry little problem, Remus snorted. His cheeks looked slightly flushed, but that was probably the sun, James reasoned. He glanced at his own tanned arms, basking in the uncharacteristically warm April day. Godric bless his dark-skinned genes. Did you ever manage to corner Reg? James said, keeping his tone neutral. Sirius's jaw clenched and unclenched a few times. Afraid not, he said stiffly. I don't give a fuck. If he gets into... if my parents... it'll be his fault and his alone. I don't give a fuck. James didn't know the exact details, but he knew Sirius's father was a weirdo and that Sirius was worried about Reg's exam results. And Sirius's faked nonchalance didn't fool him at all. Fuck Reg for being such a little shit and avoiding his brother who was only trying to bloody well help him, James thought darkly. Right, yeah, he nodded, as though it was no big deal. Reg is a wanker if he refuses to talk to you, Peter said. James made a face at him to stop, as Sirius glanced up and gave the blonde boy a disconcerting glare. What did you say? Sirius said, sounding dangerous. James rolled his eyes at Peter. Why couldn't the idiot get it into his thick skull that Sirius couldn't stand anyone else bad-mouthing his little brother, despite regularly bitching about Reg himself? Anyway, that exam was a dawdle, said Peter, looking flustered, fishing into his bag and rooting out a slightly melted chocolate bar and offering it around. I can't wait for this set of exams to finish and for the start of Easter holidays on Friday. Anyone want a bit? Sirius made a disgusted face. Remus shrugged and broke off a piece. Thanks, Wormy. I hope there's more werewolf-related questions in the owls, Peter said after a while, looking at Remus. We're experts. Wormy, said Remus, looking around anxiously. I'm bored, said Sirius. Wish it was a full moon. Sirius could say some pretty tactless things at times, James thought, aiming a hard kick at Sirius's leg. His friend yelped. Bored? You were practically dead a few days ago, and now you're already bored, said Remus, giving him an incredulous look. Sirius shrugged nonchalantly. James and Peter grinned. You might wish it, Remus added darkly from behind his book. We still have Transfiguration on Thursday. If you're bored, you could test me. Here. And he held out his book. But Sirius snorted. I'll need to look at that rubbish. I know it all. For some reason, Sirius kept acting as though he was trying to impress Remus, which was ridiculous, James thought. Because, well, why would he? Remus muttered something sarcastic, which included the phrase, big-headed mangy mutt, under his breath. A rustling noise from behind the bushes in front of them made James freeze. He immediately recognized who it was. Fucking Graceball spying on them. They could so easily have put their foot in it and said something incriminating about Remus. That thing he had been holding back with increasing difficulty snapped. This will liven you up, Padfoot, said James quietly. Look who it is. Excellent, Sirius said softly. Snivellus. As Snape emerged from the shadows of the bushes and set off across the grass, unaware that he had been spotted, Sirius and James stood up. Remus and Peter remained sitting. Remus was still staring down at his book, though his eyes were not moving, and a faint frown line had appeared between his eyebrows. Peter was looking from Sirius and James to Snape with a look of avid anticipation on his face. All right, Snivellus, said James loudly. Snape reacted so fast it was as though he had been expecting an attack. Dropping his bag, he plunged his hand inside his robes, and his wand was halfway into the air when James shouted, "Expelliarmus!" He recognized the curse Snape had been about to cast, and it wasn't pretty. His foul mood towards Snape increased. Snape's wand flew 12 feet into the air and fell with a little thud in the grass behind him. Sirius let out a bark of laughter. "Impedimenta," he said, pointing his wand at Snape, who was knocked off his feet halfway through a dive towards his own fallen wand. Students all around had turned to watch. Some of them had gotten to their feet and were edging nearer to watch. Some looked apprehensive, others entertained. Snape lay panting on the ground. James and Peter advanced on him, wands up, James glancing over his shoulder at the girls who sat chatting at the water's edge as he went. Peter was on his feet now, watching hungrily, edging around Lupin to get a clearer view. "How'd the exam go, Snively?" said James in a conversational tone. "I was watching him. His nose was touching the parchment," said Sirius viciously. "There'll be great grease marks all over it. They won't be able to read a word." Several people laughed. "You wait," Snape panted, staring up at James with pure loathing. "You wait." "Wait for what?" Sirius said coolly. "What are you going to do, Snively? Wipe your nose on us?" Considering what Snape had done to him and the recent pantsing episode with Peter, James felt Sirius was being incredibly magnanimous towards the bastard. "Fuck you, you blood traitor bastards! Densaugo, capillis evanesco, conversus genua erigit," Snape shouted. This git was meant to be Evan's mate, and yet he was into blood purity? That alone served to enrage him more. "Wash your mouth," James said coldly. "Scourgify." Pink soap bubbles frothed around Snape's mouth. "Leave him alone." James and Sirius looked around. James's free hand jumped to his hair again. Both eyed Lily's wand warily. "All right, Evans," he said, purposely trying to make his voice lower, sexier. He heard Sirius snort beside him. "Leave him alone," Lily repeated, her eyes blazing. "What's he done to you?" There was something else there. Worry. She wanted to know, had Snape attacked one of them again. "Well," said James. "Well, he hadn't, but that didn't mean that he was just going to let that wanker get away with everything else he had done. It's more the fact that he exists, if you know what I mean." Fucking bloody fucking. This looked bad. He knew he was being a prick. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and Lily was looking at him with disgust. But that bastard had gotten away with so much, and... "You think you're funny?" Lily said, looking at the other students around them who were sniggering by now. "But you're just an arrogant, bullying toe rag, Potter. Leave him alone." She looked disappointed in him, upset even, as though perhaps she had begun liking him a bit better and had been proved wrong. Fucking hell, this was a complete disaster. She was never going to like him. She was never going to fancy him back. Why was he such a fucking imbecile when it came to Evans? "I will if you go out with me, Evans," he blurted out. "Go on. Go out with me and I'll never lay a wand on old Snively again." Oh, Merlin. He heard Sirius groan beside him. Shit. Fuck. Shit. What an arsehole. What was he doing? "I wouldn't go out with you if it was a choice between you and the giant squid." "Bad luck, Prongs," said Sirius briskly, who was clearly trying to end this disastrous conversation for his sake. "Oi." Too late. Snape had reached his wand. The spell had worn off. Sectum sempra. There was a flash of light and a gash appeared on the side of James's face, splattering his robes with blood. Was it the same spell that he had used on Sirius recently? James whirled around furiously, and seconds later, Snape was hanging upside down in the air, his robes falling over his head to reveal skinny, pallid legs and a pair of graying underpants. Sirius and Peter looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Nice payback, James," they seemed to say. He joined them, as did the group of onlookers. "How do you like your own spell being used against you for once, Sniv?" taunted James. Lily seemed to be trying not to smile. Had she known Snape invented the spell? James thought to himself. She definitely didn't approve of it. "Let him down!" "Certainly," said James, flicking his wand. Snape fell to the ground and tried to get up, wand raised. The blood from James's face dripped onto his robes. Sirius's eyes narrowed at the sight. "Petrificus totalis," said Sirius, who was now looking at Snape with a vicious expression on his face. James wiped the sleeve of his robe to try to clean his face. It was still bleeding. "Leave him alone!" Lily looked furious again. Wand pointed at them. Evans, don't make me hex you," said James earnestly. "Take the curse off him, then!" This was such a bloody nightmare. James sighed deeply, then turned to Snape and muttered the counter curse. "There you go," he said, as Snape struggled to his feet again. "You're lucky Evans was here, Snivellus. He certainly wouldn't have gone so easy on him if Lily hadn't." "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her." Stunned silence. James looked at Lily's face. She blinked. Initial shock, hurt, quickly replaced by feigned indifference. "Fine," she said after a beat, a tremor in her voice despite the cool tone. "I won't bother you in the future. And I'd wash your pants if I were you, Snivellus." "Ouch!" Sirius's delighted whisper. No, this was not happening. What the ever-living fuck? "Apologize to Evans!" he roared. Wand pointed threateningly at the slimy bastard. "I don't want you to make him apologize!" Lily shouted back, unshed tears in her eyes. He said. "You're as bad as he is." "What?" James's voice leapt about 2 octaves higher. "Like an idiot." "I'd never call you a... you know what?" Did she really think he was a pure-blood weirdo? There was no way she could... What did she mean? What? "Messing up your hair because you think it looks cool to look like you just got off your broomstick? Showing off with that stupid snitch? Walking down corridors and hexing anyone who annoys you just because you can? I'm surprised your broomstick can get off the ground with that fat head on it. You make me sick." His mouth hung open, speechless. How did she know about the snitch? He had only just nicked it a few hours ago. Unless she had been keeping tabs on him? "Say something witty! Say anything! Don't let this end like..." She turned on her heel and hurried away. "Evans!" James shouted after her. "Hey, Evans!" She didn't look back. "What is it with her?" James said, trying and failing to look as if this was a throwaway question of no real importance to him. "Reading between the lines, I'd say she thinks you're a bit conceited, old chap." "Right," said James, who looked furious now. "Right." There was another flash of light, and Snape was once again hanging upside down in the air. "Who wants to see me take off Snively's pants?" he said, wiping his sleeve across his face again. It felt wet. Snape had called Lily a terrible, offensive slur. He wasn't going easy on him now. "James?" In a quiet, cautious voice. It was Remus. Remus, who wasn't confident enough to yell at him to stop, but who looked very ill at ease. He felt sick. Snape hanging above him, limbs flailing. It wasn't funny, never had been. Revenge didn't taste sweet. Remus's concerned face, Sirius's mask looking disinterested and unaffected, as always. Peter looking unsure, his small blue eyes flickering from side to side. Lily Evans's figure hurrying away from the castle. What had he done? What the fuck had he done? He stuttered. Fuck! Evans! He lifted the spell and found himself racing after her retreating figure. If she heard him, she didn't slow down. He caught up with her just as she reached the far end of the lake, avoiding her friends. "Evans," he panted. "Evans, please, leave me alone." She was crying, trying to look away so he wouldn't see her tears. His chest constricted painfully. He had never made a girl cry before, but now he had done that to a girl he really admired and fancied from afar. He grimaced. "I'm sorry," he said in a rushed voice, turning to face away from her immediately. "I just wanted to. I never asked for your... I promise I'll leave you alone. I just wanted to apologize." "To make yourself feel better?" His cheeks were on fire. He grimaced again. She was right. "Yes," he said, feeling like a little shit. Silence. "You may be many annoying things, Potter, but at least you're honest," she eventually replied, tight-lipped. "I'm truly sorry, though, Evans, about Snape. I never thought." He stopped, grasping for words. Damn his word-finding difficulties. "That was nasty, Potter. I know you blame him for Sirius, and maybe he... But you bullying him?" She was still avoiding eye contact, her voice hitched. He closed his eyes tightly, as though to block himself from reliving the entire beastly scene. "Fuck, Evans, I know. I'm sorry, and I'm sorry I upset you so much." He heard her swallow. "You upset me?" "My friendship with Severus, my best friend for the past 5 years, just ended. And you think I'm upset about what you said or did?" Her voice was still trembling, but she turned and looked him straight in the eyes. She looked dignified, desperately trying to compose herself. He felt so bad for her. What was he to her except an annoying, immature little fucker who occasionally made her laugh, but mostly just irritated her beyond measure? She had just lost her best friend. "I'm so sorry." He didn't have the foggiest idea what to say to her. He wanted to make her feel better, to fix it all, but he couldn't. "Hold still, Potter," she said quietly, murmuring some healing charms as she pointed her wand at his bleeding face. "Faces bleed a lot. It's not deep or anything serious, he said. "It's pretty deep, and I can't get it to stop," she said, looking at him with a strange expression. Did she now believe him about Sirius? "It's perfectly fine," he said. "Go to Poppy, now. Promise me?" she said, swiping under her eyes. "I don't need... Oh, fine, all right. And I'm sorry for following you like a selfish bastard," he added, ruffling his hair anxiously and stopping as soon as he realized, seeing as she seemed to hate him messing with it. "I'll leave you alone." Her eyes seemed to soften slightly as she nodded and turned away once more. He just wanted to give her a hug or pat her arm or something, as he would have done to any of his friends. "We're not friends," he thought. "You are not her friend." He turned and walked back towards the castle. He felt guilty and miserable and ashamed, but he knew he deserved it. She didn't. Everything was going a bit sideways, Sirius thought, bristling with annoyance as he watched James half-heartedly turning his spoon in his porridge, leaving his breakfast uneaten. His best mate was miserable after the Snape incident. Sirius thought he was exaggerating. James hadn't done anything bad at all, not compared to what that greasy snake had done. And Lily was an idiot for being friends with Snively for so long when he was clearly a Voldemort fan. James was the best person he knew, and he wouldn't hear a single word said against him. James was always kind, always brave, always supportive. Fuck everyone else. He would do anything for his best friend. Remus was annoying him. He had looked guilty when James was being dramatic about what a bastard he had been, saying stuff like, "I should have stopped you both." "It's my fault. I started it. It was my idea," James said. "Don't be stupid, Moony," he had said with a derisive eye roll. Since when do Prongs and I listen to the voice of reason when it comes to that wanker? Plus, he deserved it. I don't see what a big deal it is. Remus had given him a look, a pointed, angry look. No, you wouldn't, would you? Remus had said. He had flushed then, feeling a twinge of guilt and something else, like Remus having a less than stellar opinion of him mattered too much. What do you mean? He sneered. I mean that the two of you are immature and pathetic sometimes, and I could have stopped you, only I didn't, Remus had replied. And that's on me. You couldn't have stopped us, Sirius had said in a condescending tone, not sure what he wanted to convey aside from not wanting Mooney to blame himself and not wanting to look weak in front of him. Remus stepped forwards then, his face hard, and Sirius found himself backing away from him until he was pressed against the common room wall. Remus's moss-green eyes narrowed, looking strangely amber, the way they always want to do near the full moon. He was suddenly aware of how tall Remus had gotten. Remus grabbed his tie with one hand and pulled Sirius towards him. I could throw you across this room now and you wouldn't be able to stop me, Sirius Black. Sirius could feel his heart pounding, the wild glitter in Remus's eyes, the vice-like grip of his fist, his mouth inches away from his. He believed him. You wouldn't, though. You don't have the nerve. He saw the flicker of disbelief in Remus's eyes. It was, obviously, a stupid thing to say given the circumstances. But that seemed to be his forte, digging a hole for himself when he was losing a fight. You really are fucking stupid, Remus's hoarse voice growled. Was he imagining the admiration or fondness which he saw mixed with the obvious profound irritation? Never claimed otherwise, he smirked, looking up at Remus with no hint of fear now. You look like you're about to snog him senseless, Mooney, said Peter, bursting into giddy, slightly anxious laughter. James rolled his eyes and laughed briefly. He hadn't said a word. Remus let go of Sirius's tie and backed away. Just making a point, he muttered. Point taken. Sirius cleared his throat as he fixed his tie, feeling his face flush. He had no idea why that exchange had given him the same feeling in his stomach as snogging Rufus. It was probably indigestion. Come on, we best get going. One more exam and then holidays, Peter said, trying to fill the silence. Hurrah, can't wait, he drawled, wondering what excuse he could get away with. There was no way in hell he was going home for Easter. They trudged out of the dining room. Looks like you have mail, Peter added, as one of the school owls fluttered behind Sirius. That was weird. He removed the thick, old-fashioned, sepia-colored parchment from its leg, immediately recognizing the feel of it. Black family crest aside. I'll catch up with you, he said, waving them on as he noticed James's look. Leaning against the corridor wall, he opened it, jaw clenched. Dear Sirius, I'm afraid I have to request your assistance. I am woefully unprepared for my transfiguration examination this year. I have tried as hard as I can, unsuccessfully, to master the content in an exam format. If you could offer me some tuition over Easter holidays, I would be grateful. I am concerned that I will not do well in the examinations at the end of the year, and I do not wish to disappoint Mama and Papa. But I was worried you might not try hard enough in your own exams, if you knew. That is why I did not agree to talk to you earlier. I'm sorry if I offended you. Regards, Regulus. Stupid fucking idiot, he said. Why didn't you ask for help earlier? As though he could remember the last time he had personally asked anyone for help, if ever. Still, Reg should have known to come to him. If Regulus had fucking talked to him the past few times he had tried to approach him. As things stood, he had impulsively, spitefully, decided to ignore Regulus and do his best in the owls so far. And he knew he had aced his transfiguration, charms, and data exams. If he outright failed the rest of his exams, his parents would smell a rat. His worst fear was Orion trying out the Imperious curse on him and finding out about Remus, the marauders being animagi, him snogging Rufus, and Orion telling his family. He was going to have to go home, and he had no idea how to fix this, apart from having a big all-night row with his parents and getting into deep, deep trouble. Enough trouble that Regulus's exam results would still not register as an issue by the time the summer holidays came, enraging his parents. It didn't bear thinking about. 2 good nights' sleep. That was all he was getting by the looks of things. Scowling at the family crest, he scrunched the parchment into a ball, frustration coursing through his veins, and it burst into flames. Reg, next time warn me in advance, or I swear to Merlin I won't help you. I had other plans my Easter halls. Sirius. He walked down the corridor, head high, trying to ignore the weight that had settled on his chest.